When we think of floods, we think of water, rising rivers, storm surges, heavy rains. But if I told you that there have been some pretty nasty floods in history that had nothing to do with water, but instead were floods of beer, molasses, even invisible gases? Today, I'm going to take you on a journey through some of the strangest and deadliest non-water floods in history. Our first stop is London. The year is 1814. On October 17th, the Mew & Co.'s Horseshoe Brewery, a massive vat of beer, 22 feet tall, holding over 135,000 gallons of beer, suddenly burst. The force of this rupture was so strong that it caused a chain reaction, and other vats nearby began to break open too. In total, over 323,000 gallons or 1.4 million litres of beer flooded into the streets of the St Giles district in London. This torrent of beer rushed through the surrounding streets, tearing through homes, causing buildings to collapse. The floodwaters were so powerful that the falling debris trapped people in cellars and basements, which quickly began to fill with beer. Tragically, 8 people were killed. It might sound almost comical, a flood of beer, but it was a deadly disaster. And in an ironic twist, the brewery was actually granted a tax refund for the lost beer, but no compensation was given to the families of the victims. In fact, Mew & Company were not even held legally responsible for the disaster, as in court, the incident was ruled as an act of God. And while beer floods might seem bizarre, our next flood takes us across the Atlantic to Boston, involving something much stickier: molasses. It was January 15th, 1919, on a cold winter's day in Massachusetts. But what happened here was anything but cold. It's known as the Great Molasses Flood. Molasses is a thick, syrupy substance that is used as a sweetener, made from crushed sugarcane and beets, the equivalent in the UK being known as treacle or black treacle. But when a 2.3 million gallon tank of the sugary substance suddenly burst, it sent a 25-foot wave of thick, sticky molasses rushing through the streets at 35 miles an hour. But how could this happen? Well, the tank itself had been poorly constructed and never tested when filled to capacity, and on the day itself, Boston had experienced a sudden rise in temperature, going from freezing to an unusually warm 4.5 degrees Celsius. But worst of all, reports indicate the storage tank had been creaking and groaning for some time, and leaks had grown so common the company had painted the tank brown to hide them. It might sound absurd, a flood of molasses, but it was catastrophic. A 25-foot high tsunami of syrup crashed through the North End, a crowded working-class neighbourhood. Buildings were torn from their foundations, the nearby railroad was knocked off its tracks, and everything in its path was swept away. People, horses, and all the debris you can think of, all engulfed in its dense, sticky mass. The sheer force of the molasses was enough to crush anything in its path, and the viscosity of the substance meant that the cleanup took weeks. Rescue teams, including police, firefighters, and soldiers, all worked tirelessly to find survivors in the sticky mess that was left. Over 87,000 hours were spent cleaning up the streets, but tragically, 21 people were killed and around 150 injured. All those rescue workers who would have been covered head to toe in sticky syrup spread that around the city. In fact, on hot summer days, people in Boston say you can still smell the molasses on the air, more than 100 years later. The Great Molasses Flood is a perfect example of how industrial accidents can lead to some of the strangest and deadliest disasters in history. Now let's go to Cameroon. In 1986, the next flood is unlike anything you've ever heard of. It wasn't beer and it wasn't molasses, it was invisible, a flood of carbon dioxide. Lake Nyos is a deep volcanic crater lake formed over an inactive volcanic vent. Beneath the lake lies a pool of magma which releases carbon dioxide into the water. Normally the water in lakes circulate and allows gases to slowly dissipate into the atmosphere, but in deep tropical lakes like Nyos, the water can become stratified, with warmer water on the surface and cooler water below. This allows CO2 to accumulate in deeper layers, forming a kind of natural time bomb. Think of it like a can of Coke that's been shaken for years. When it finally pops, the gas has nowhere to go but out, and fast. And on the 21st of August 1986, that something happened. A landslide or perhaps a small volcanic eruption triggered the sudden release of over 1.6 million tons of CO2 from the lake. Carbon dioxide is heavier than air, so this dense gas swept downhill from the lake and into the surrounding valleys, suddenly suffocating everything in its path. Over 1,700 people died, along with countless number of animals and livestock. Within minutes, people living up to 15 miles from the lake were overwhelmed. Entire villages were wiped out, and the worst part, no one saw it coming. The victims died in their sleep or collapsed whilst trying to flee. Survivors described waking up to find family members and neighbours dead, with no signs of struggle or warning. Those who managed to survive often suffered from lingering health issues such as respiratory problems, paralysis, and skin burns due to the high concentration of gas. Can you imagine waking up to finding your entire village or hometown gone with no clue what had happened? When rescuers arrived, they encountered eerie scenes. Entire villages silent, with no signs of life, except the occasional survivor. There was no physical damage to the buildings or environment, but the people, the animals, even insects had all perished. It's one of the most tragic natural disasters that you've probably never even heard of, a reminder that even the air we breathe can be deadly in the right circumstances. Floods don't always come from water, they can come from beer, molasses, or even gas. These disasters may sound bizarre, almost unbelievable, but they just show how vulnerable we can be to the unexpected. Whether it's industrial accidents or natural phenomena, when liquids and gases go where they're not supposed to, the results can be disastrous. Thanks for watching, and just think, the next time it rains, be happy it's just water. It sent a 20-foot-5 wave It sent a 20-foot-5 on a cold winter's day in Massachusetts. Let me run that again. Massachusetts. Massachusetts. Is that right?